The moment Brielle Vaughn heard the horses thundering toward her homestead, she knew her carefully constructed life was about to shatter into 1,000 jagged pieces. She had been kneading dough at the kitchen table when the vibrations traveled through the floorboards, subtle at first, then growing stronger until the tin cups rattled on their hooks and dust drifted down from the ceiling beams. Her hands stilled in the sticky mass of flour and water, her heart climbing into her throat as she lifted her eyes toward the loft where her sister Bonnie hid during daylight hours. It was August 1883 in Clifton, Arizona, a copper mining town nestled in the rugged mountains where the San Francisco River carved its path through the territory. The summer heat pressed down like a physical weight, making the air shimmer above the red earth and turning every breath into an effort. Brielle had chosen this isolated homestead precisely because of its distance from town, a mile beyond where most respectable folk settled, where the mesquite grew thick and the land rolled in copper-tinted waves toward the distant peaks. She wiped her hands hastily on her apron and moved to the window, her pulse hammering so loud she could hear it in her ears. 3 riders approached, their silhouettes dark against the brilliant sky. They moved with purpose, not the leisurely pace of neighbors paying a social call. Brielle's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Had someone seen Bonnie during one of their careful evening walks? Had word somehow spread that she was harboring her younger sister against their uncle's wishes? "Stay quiet," she whispered toward the ceiling, knowing Bonnie could not respond even if she wanted to. Her sister had been born without the ability to speak, her voice stolen by some quirk of nature that their late mother had called God's mysterious ways. Their father, dead these past 2 years from a mining accident, had protected both his daughters with fierce devotion. But when he died and their uncle Sila's inherited guardianship, everything changed. Silas saw Bonnie as a burden, an unmarriageable embarrassment who cost money to feed and house. He had made his intentions clear within weeks of taking control of the family finances. He would send Bonnie to an asylum in Tucson, where she could be properly managed by people equipped to handle such unfortunates. Brielle had fled with her sister in the dead of night 6 months ago, taking only what they could carry, and the small inheritance their mother had left specifically to her eldest daughter. She had purchased this homestead with that money, a simple 2-room cabin with a loft, and had been living in careful isolation ever since. She told the few townspeople she encountered that she was a widow, that her husband had died on the trail west, and she was making a fresh start. No one questioned a woman in mourning, especially not one who kept to herself and paid her bills on time. The riders drew closer, and Brielle could make out more details now. The man in the lead sat tall in his saddle, his hat pulled low against the sun. He wore a vest over a work shirt, and she could see the glint of metal at his hip. A gun, but that meant little in Arizona territory where most men went armed as naturally as they wore boots. The 2 men flanking him looked harder, their faces weathered and suspicious. Brielle's hands trembled as she smoothed her skirt and checked that her hair was properly pinned. She had to appear calm, had to seem like nothing more than what she claimed to be, a simple widow woman trying to make her way. She moved to the door and stepped out onto the narrow porch, shading her eyes against the glare. The riders pulled up in her yard, their horses snorting and stamping in the heat. The lead man touched the brim of his hat in greeting, his eyes sharp and assessing as they swept over her and then the cabin behind her. "Madam," he said, his voice a deep drawl that carried easily despite the distance between them. "Name's Zachary Knox. I run cattle in these parts, and these are 2 of my ranch hands. We're tracking some horses that went missing 3 nights back. 8 head, including a valuable breeding mare. Trail leads this direction." Brielle kept her expression neutral, though relief flooded through her. Horses. They were looking for horses, not for her sister. "I have not seen any stray horses, Mr. Knox. It has been just me here, and I keep to my own property mostly." Zachary Knox dismounted with fluid grace, the movement of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on his own 2 feet. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of strong coffee. His face was handsome in a rough-hewn way, all strong angles and sun-bronzed skin. He walked toward her porch with his hands held casually at his sides, non-threatening but alert. "Don't mean to trouble you none, madam, but I'd appreciate if I could water our horses at your well and maybe take a look around your property. Just to be thorough, you understand. Those horses represent a substantial investment, and I aim to find them." She wanted to refuse, wanted to send them on their way immediately, but she knew that would only raise suspicion. A woman alone should welcome the assistance of neighbors, should be grateful for their presence. To act otherwise would mark her as having something to hide. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. "The well is around back. Help yourself to the water. I have been home all day and have heard nothing unusual, but you are welcome to look around the yard." "Much obliged." Zachary gestured to his men, who began leading the horses toward the back of the cabin. He himself remained in the yard, his gaze traveling over the neat vegetable garden she had planted, the small chicken coop, the wood stacked against the side of the house. "You keep a tidy place, Mrs. Vaughn," she supplied. "Brielle Vaughn, Mrs. Vaughn, you been out here long, 6 months or so, since spring. That's a hard thing, homesteading alone. You manage all this yourself." She heard the question beneath the question. How was she surviving? Where was her family? Why was she truly here? "I manage well enough, Mr. Knox. I have chickens for eggs, a garden that does reasonably in this heat if I water it morning and evening. I take in some sewing from town when I need additional income." He nodded slowly, still looking around. His attention snagged on something near the corner of the cabin, and he walked over to examine it. Brielle's heart sank. 2 sets of boots sat there, one her size and one smaller. Bonnie's boots, left out to dry after they had crossed the creek yesterday evening during their walk. 2 pairs of boots, Zachary observed quietly. He looked back at her and his expression had shifted, not hostile but definitely curious. "You entertaining company, Mrs. Vaughn. Those are both mine," she said quickly, too quickly. She heard the false note in her own voice and cursed herself silently. "The smaller pair are older, from when I was younger. I keep them for working in the garden when I do not want to ruin my good boots." Zachary picked up the smaller boots and examined them. They were clearly not old or worn for garden work. They were in good condition, regularly oiled with only minor scuffs. His eyes met hers, and she saw that he knew she was lying. But why would a widow woman lie about something as simple as an extra pair of boots? Before he could press the question, a sound came from inside the cabin. A soft thump, like something being knocked over. It came from above, from the loft. Zachary's attention snapped toward the cabin. "Thought you said you were alone, madam." "I am," Brielle said, her voice rising slightly with barely controlled panic. "That must have been something settling. Old boards, the heat, you know how it is." But even as she spoke, another sound came. Softer this time, but unmistakably the sound of someone moving. Zachary's hand drifted toward his gun, not drawing it but resting on the grip. His entire demeanor had changed, his body tensing with readiness. "Madam, I am going to need you to step aside. Someone's in your cabin and I need to know who." "You have no right," Brielle said, but her protest was weak. This was Arizona territory, where law was a fluid concept and a rancher like Zachary Knox likely carried more authority than any distant marshal. And if he thought she was harboring criminals or helping with horse theft, he would not simply ride away. "I have every right to investigate what might be theft of my property," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Now step aside, Mrs. Vaughn, or I will move you aside." Brielle felt tears burning in her eyes, but she held them back through sheer will. She had protected Bonnie for 6 months, had built this fragile sanctuary, and now it was collapsing around her. She could lie, could try to maintain the fiction, but the truth was already written in the fear on her face and the sounds coming from the loft. "Please," she whispered, "please do not hurt her. She is harmless, I swear to you. She has done nothing wrong." Zachary's expression shifted to confusion. "Her?" Before Brielle could respond, she heard the creak of the loft ladder. No, Bonnie was coming down. Her sister must have realized that hiding was no longer possible, that whoever was outside had heard her. Brielle rushed past Zachary, back into the cabin, desperate to reach Bonnie before the cowboy did. But she was too late. By the time she crossed the threshold, Bonnie was already halfway down the ladder, her blonde hair hanging in a long braid down her back, her simple dress dusty from the loft. She was 20 years old, 3 years younger than Brielle, and she looked terrified. Her blue eyes were wide, and her hands gripped the ladder rungs so tightly her knuckles showed white. Zachary had followed Brielle inside and now stood in the doorway, blocking most of the light. His hand had moved away from his gun, and his expression showed only surprise and bewilderment. "Your sister?" he asked. Brielle moved to stand between Zachary and Bonnie, protective instinct overriding common sense. "Yes, my sister. She lives here with me. That is not a crime." "No, madam, it is not." Zachary removed his hat, a gesture of respect that seemed automatic. "But it does beg the question of why you felt the need to lie about it, and why she was hiding in your loft like a fugitive." Bonnie had reached the floor now and pressed close to Brielle's side. She was trembling, her breathing fast and shallow. Brielle wrapped an arm around her sister's shoulders and held her close. "We are not fugitives," Brielle said. "We have broken no laws. We simply wish to be left alone." Zachary studied them both, his gaze moving from Brielle's defiant face to Bonnie's frightened one and back again. "You are running from something, or someone." It was not a question. Brielle felt her defenses crumbling. She was so tired of lying, of hiding, of living in constant fear that each day might be the one when their uncle's men came to drag Bonnie away. Maybe it was the heat, or the exhaustion, or something in Zachary Knox's steady gaze that suggested he might actually listen, but she found words spilling out. "Our uncle. We are running from our uncle. He has legal guardianship over Bonnie since our father died, and he wants to send her away. To an asylum, because she is mute." The last word hung in the air. Zachary's eyes widened slightly, and he looked at Bonnie with new understanding. She stared back at him, her lips pressed together, unable to defend herself or plead her own case. "She cannot speak," Brielle continued, the words coming faster now. "She was born that way. But she is not mad, Mr. Knox. She is not simple or dangerous or any of the other things people assume. She is just quiet. She understands everything. She can read and write better than most men I know. She is gentle and kind, and our father loved her dearly. But our uncle sees her as a burden and an embarrassment. So we ran. And we have been hiding here, trying to build a life where no one would find us or judge her or try to take her away." Zachary was quiet for a long moment. His men had appeared in the doorway behind him, drawn by the voices, but he waved them back without taking his eyes off the two sisters. "Your uncle know where you are?" he asked finally. "I do not think so. We covered our tracks carefully." I used my mother's maiden name when I bought this property, and I have avoided town as much as possible. But you cannot hide forever. Someone will recognize you eventually. Someone will talk. I know. Brielle's voice broke slightly. I know that, but what else could I do? Let him lock her away in some terrible place where they would treat her like an animal. She is my sister. I could not abandon her. Zachary nodded slowly, as if processing all of this information. He looked at Bonnie again, his expression thoughtful. Can you write, miss? Bonnie glanced at Brielle, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, Bonnie pulled away from her sister and walked to the table where Brielle kept a slate for making lists and notes. She picked up the chalk and wrote in careful, precise letters. Yes, I can write. Zachary walked over and read the words. A faint smile touched his lips. Well, that is clearer than the handwriting of most of my ranch hands. He looked up at Bonnie. I am sorry if I frightened you, miss. I did not mean any harm. I am just looking for my horses. Bonnie wrote again. We have not seen any horses. I believe you. Zachary turned back to Brielle. And I believe your story too, Mrs. Vaughn. Or is it Miss Vaughn? Brielle felt her cheeks warm. Miss, I lied about being a widow. I thought it would raise fewer questions if people thought I was mourning rather than simply alone. That was probably wise, given the circumstances. Zachary resettled his hat on his head. Well, Miss Vaughn, I appreciate you letting us water our horses. We will continue tracking our lost stock and leave you in peace. Brielle stared at him in confusion. That is it. You are just going to leave. What would you have me do? Turn you into an uncle who wants to institutionalize a young woman who has done nothing to deserve it? Drag you both back to whatever town you fled from? He shook his head. That does not sit right with me, Miss Vaughn. Seems to me you and your sister have a right to live your lives as you see fit, so long as you are not hurting anyone. But you do not even know us. Why would you take our word for any of this? Zachary's expression softened. My brother was born with a twisted leg. Could not walk right, always had a limp. Plenty of folks told my parents they should send him away, that he would never amount to anything, that he was a burden. But my parents kept him home and loved him same as the rest of us. Thomas runs the ranch books now, and he is the smartest man I know. Taught me that a person's worth is not measured by what they can or cannot do with their body. It is measured by what they do with their heart and mind. Brielle felt unexpected tears spilling down her cheeks. After months of fear and isolation, to hear such words from a stranger was almost overwhelming. Bonnie had moved back to her side and was gripping her hand tightly. Thank you, Brielle whispered. Thank you for understanding. Nothing to thank me for. Just treating people decent, which ought to be the baseline, not something extraordinary. Zachary moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. But I will say this. You are pretty isolated out here, and that could be dangerous for two women alone. If you ever need anything, my ranch is about 5 miles northwest, following the river. Big oak tree at the entrance with my brand carved into it. KK brand. Anyone in Clifton can tell you how to find the Knox Ranch. You need help with something too heavy to lift, or if someone bothers you, or if you just want neighbors who will not ask too many questions, you come find me. Understood, Brielle nodded, not trusting her voice. Zachary touched his hat brim one more time and walked out into the blazing sunshine. She heard him talking to his men, their voices low and indistinct, and then the sound of horses moving off. She and Bonnie stood frozen in the doorway until the riders disappeared into the shimmering heat haze. Finally, Bonnie tugged on Brielle's sleeve and pointed to the slate she still held. She had written new words. He was kind. Yes, Brielle agreed, wiping at her eyes. He was very kind. I did not expect that. Bonnie wrote again. Do you think he will tell anyone? I do not know. I do not think so, but we should be careful regardless. Even as she said it, though, Brielle felt something shift inside her. For the first time since they had fled, she felt the tiny stirring of hope. Maybe they were not as alone as she had thought. Maybe there were still good people in the world. Over the next 2 weeks, Brielle found her thoughts returning to Zachary Knox with surprising frequency. She told herself it was simple gratitude, that anyone would think fondly of a person who had shown them unexpected mercy. But she could not quite explain the flutter in her chest when she remembered the way he had smiled at Bonnie's careful handwriting, or the warmth in his eyes when he spoke about his brother. She and Bonnie returned to their careful routine. Early morning chores before the heat became unbearable. Afternoons spent in the relative cool of the cabin, with Bonnie sewing or reading while Brielle worked on mending she had taken in from town. Evening walks when the sun dropped toward the horizon and the air became bearable again. They walked along the creek, and Bonnie would sometimes gather smooth stones or interesting pieces of wood, her face peaceful in the golden light. It was during one of these evening walks that they saw riders approaching again. Brielle's first instinct was to grab Bonnie and run, but then she recognized the tall figure in the lead. Zachary Knox, alone this time, riding a handsome bay horse and leading a pack mule. He drew up when he saw them and dismounted with that same fluid grace. "Evening, Miss Vaughn. Miss Bonnie." "Mr. Knox." Brielle was hyper-aware of how she must look, her hair coming loose from its pins, her dress dusty from walking. "We were not expecting company. I hope I am not intruding. I wanted to bring you something." He gestured to the pack mule, which carried several full sacks. "I had some supplies left over from provisioning my ranch hands, and I thought you might have use for them. Flour, cornmeal, dried beans, some salt pork. If you do not mind me saying so, you looked a bit thin when I saw you last." Brielle did not know whether to be offended or grateful. "That is very generous, but we cannot pay you for these things." "Did I ask for payment?" Zachary's tone was gentle. "Consider it a neighborly gesture. You would do the same if I needed help, I reckon." Bonnie had pulled out the small slate she now carried with her on their walks. She wrote quickly and held it up. "Thank you. That is very kind." Zachary smiled at her. "You are welcome, Miss Bonnie, and I brought something else too." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a bound notebook and several pencils. "Figured a slate is useful but limited. Thought you might like something where you could write longer thoughts, maybe keep a journal or such." Bonnie's face lit up with delight. She took the notebook with careful hands, running her fingers over the smooth cover. She wrote on her slate, "This is wonderful, thank you so much." "Happy to do it." Zachary looked at Brielle. "Would you mind if I helped you get these supplies up to your cabin? Be easier with an extra set of hands." What could she say? She nodded, and together they led the horses and mule back to the homestead. Zachary was easy company, pointing out a hawk circling overhead, commenting on how well her garden was doing despite the heat. He did not pry or ask uncomfortable questions. He simply helped unload the supplies, stacking the sacks neatly in her small pantry, and then prepared to take his leave. "Mr. Knox," Brielle said as he swung back into his saddle, "why are you doing this? The supplies, the notebook. Why are you being so kind to us?" He looked down at her, his expression serious. "Because you deserve kindness, Miss Vaughn, both of you. And because I think you have been without it for far too long." He touched his hat brim. "Take care now, and remember what I said. You need anything, you come find me." He rode off into the gathering dusk, and Brielle stood watching until he disappeared. Bonnie came to stand beside her, notebook clutched to her chest. When Brielle looked down, her sister was smiling. That night, after they had eaten a simple supper and climbed into their narrow beds, Brielle lay awake listening to the sounds of the desert night. Coyotes calling in the distance, the whisper of wind through the mesquite, the creaking of the cabin settling. She thought about Zachary Knox and the unexpected gift of his kindness. She thought about the way he had looked at her, like she was worth something more than pity or judgment. And she thought about how long it had been since anyone besides Bonnie had made her feel seen, truly seen, as herself rather than as a problem to be solved. Sleep was a long time coming. 3 days later, Brielle made the trip into Clifton to deliver the mending she had completed, and to pick up a few necessary supplies that even Zachary's generosity could not cover. She left early in the morning, when the air still held a hint of coolness, and she left Bonnie with strict instructions to stay inside and out of sight. The trip took an hour each way, walking along the dusty road that wound through the hills. Clifton was a rough mining town, its main street lined with businesses that catered to the miners and ranchers of the area. The Mercantile, the assay office, 2 competing saloons, a dry goods store, a church that doubled as the schoolhouse. Brielle moved through the town quickly, keeping her head down and her interactions brief. She dropped off the finished mending at the dry goods store, collected her small payment, and was purchasing coffee and lamp oil at the Mercantile when she heard a voice behind her that made her blood run cold. "Well now, that certainly looks like my runaway niece." She turned slowly, her heart hammering to find her Uncle Silas standing in the doorway of the Mercantile. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall and thin, with graying hair and cold blue eyes that missed nothing. He wore a suit despite the heat, projecting an air of respectability that she knew was a carefully maintained fiction. "Uncle Silas," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "What are you doing in Clifton? Looking for you, of course. Did you think I would simply let you disappear with your sister? That I would not search?" He moved closer, and several other customers in the store stopped to watch the confrontation. "You have caused me considerable trouble and expense, Brielle. Running off in the night, stealing money that was rightfully under my management. That money was from Mother's inheritance. It was mine to take. The courts might disagree, and that is beside the point. Where is Bonnie? You will tell me right now, or I will have the sheriff involved." Brielle lifted her chin. "Bonnie is safe. She is happy, and I will not tell you where she is." Silas's face darkened with anger. "She is not capable of being safe or happy on her own. She needs proper care, professional supervision. I have made arrangements with an excellent facility in Tucson." "You mean an asylum where they will lock her away and treat her like she is insane?" "She is not insane, Uncle. She is simply mute." "She is defective," Silas hissed, low enough that the watching townspeople could not hear clearly. "She is a burden and an embarrassment. Your father indulged her shamefully, and now you are continuing his foolishness. But I am her legal guardian, Brielle, not you. The law is on my side." Before Brielle could respond, a new voice entered the conversation, deep, calm, and carrying clear authority. "Is there a problem here, Miss Vaughn?" Zachary Knox stood in the doorway of the Mercantile, his considerable frame blocking much of the light. He was dressed for town rather than ranch work, wearing a clean shirt and vest, but he still wore his gun at his hip. His eyes were locked on Silas with an expression that was decidedly unfriendly. "This is a private family matter," Silas said coldly. "It does not concern you, whoever you are." "Zachary Knox. I run the KK Ranch north of town, and if it concerns Miss Vaughn, then I am making it my concern." "Miss Vaughn, is this man bothering you?" Brielle's mind raced. She could deny the relationship, could try to maintain the fiction that she was someone else, but what would be the point? Silas had already identified her. And something in Zachary's solid presence made her feel braver than she had felt in months. "This is my uncle, Silas Vaughn. He is looking for my sister and me. I see. And I take it you do not wish to be found." "I do not. We do not." Zachary nodded slowly and turned his attention back to Sela's. "Then I suggest you leave, Mr. Vaughn. The lady has made her wishes clear." Silas drew himself up to his full height, though he was still several inches shorter than Zachary. "I have legal guardianship over my younger niece. I have every right to know her whereabouts." "Legal guardianship is a complicated thing in the territory," Zachary said mildly, "especially when the person in question is of age and wishes to make her own choices. My understanding is that guardianship becomes a lot less clear-cut when the ward is an adult and is being cared for by family. Seems to me this would be a matter for the courts to decide, not something to be settled in the middle of a mercantile." "Are you a lawyer as well as a rancher?" Silas asked sarcastically. "No, but my brother is. Well, he studied law back east before he came home to help run the ranch, and he has been educating me on such matters." Zachary's smile did not reach his eyes. "Point being, Mr. Vaughn, you can try to make trouble for Miss Vaughn and her sister, but you will find it a long and expensive process. And you will find that folks around here tend to side with people who mind their own business and treat others decent. So maybe you should think carefully about whether this fight is worth your time and money." Silas looked between Zachary and Brielle, calculation in his cold eyes. Finally, he smiled thinly. "This is not over, Brielle. I will not be deterred by some rancher playing hero. I will have Bonnie placed in proper care, and I will see that you answer for your theft and irresponsibility. Mark my words." He turned and strode out of the mercantile, leaving a wake of whispers and curious stares. Brielle found her legs were shaking, and she gripped the counter for support. Zachary was at her side immediately, his hand steady on her elbow. "Are you all right? He found us," she whispered. "After all this time he found us. But he does not know where you live, does he? He did not follow you here." "I do not think so. I was careful. But now he knows we are in Clifton. He will search until he finds our homestead. Then we will make sure he does not find it. Come on, let me get you home. You should not be alone on the road, not with him in town." Brielle wanted to protest that she did not need protection, that she had been managing on her own all this time, but the truth was she felt deeply shaken. She allowed Zachary to finish purchasing her supplies and then walk her outside to where his horse waited. He helped her mount in front of him, then swung up behind her. It was improper, riding this way with a man she barely knew, but propriety seemed like a distant concern when set against the immediate threat of her uncle. The ride to her homestead passed in tense silence. Zachary's arms were steady on either side of her as he controlled the horse, and despite her fear, Brielle found herself aware of his warmth, his solidity, the faint scent of leather and soap. She had not been this close to a man since her father died, and she had forgotten how comforting that presence could be. When they reached the cabin, Bonnie was waiting on the porch, clearly having heard the approaching horse. Her expression shifted from alarm to relief when she saw Brielle, then to curiosity when she recognized Zachary. Zachary helped Brielle dismount and then addressed both sisters. "We have a problem. Your uncle is in Clifton. He confronted Miss Brielle at the mercantile." Bonnie's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes going wide with fear. She looked at Brielle desperately. "It is all right," Brielle said, though she did not feel all right at all. "He does not know where we live yet, but he is searching." Bonnie grabbed her slate with shaking hands and wrote, "What do we do?" "You cannot stay here," Zachary said firmly. "Not if there is even a chance he will find this place. You need to come to my ranch." "We cannot do that," Brielle protested. "We would be putting you at risk. If Uncle Silas finds out you are sheltering us, he could make legal trouble for you. Let him try. I have more resources than you do, Miss Vaughn, and better connections. If this comes to a legal fight, you will need someone with influence on your side." And practically speaking, my ranch house is large and well-staffed. If your uncle shows up there, he will not be able to simply take your sister by force. Here in this isolated homestead, you are vulnerable. Surely you can see that." Brielle hated that he was right. She had worked so hard to create this sanctuary, this place where she and Bonnie could be safe, and now it was compromised. The thought of abandoning it, of accepting charity from a man she barely knew, went against every independent instinct she possessed. But when she looked at Bonnie's frightened face, she knew she had no real choice. "For how long?" she asked quietly. "For as long as it takes, until we can figure out a more permanent solution." Bonnie was writing frantically on her slate. She held it up. "Why are you helping us?" "You barely know us." Zachary's expression softened as he read the words. "Because it is the right thing to do, Miss Bonnie, and because I have a feeling you two are worth helping." He looked at Brielle. "Pack whatever you need. I will take you both to the ranch now, while your uncle is still in town making inquiries. Better to move before he has a chance to organize a search." It took less than an hour to pack their essential belongings. They had so little anyway, just their clothes and a few personal items. Brielle's hands trembled as she folded their dresses and packed her mother's silver brush, the only valuable thing she had left from her old life. This cabin had represented freedom, independence, a life built on her own terms. Leaving it felt like defeat. But when she stepped outside and saw Zachary lifting Bonnie onto his horse with gentle care, making sure she was secure and comfortable before he handed her the reins, she felt something else too. Gratitude. And something warmer that she was not quite ready to name. The ride to the Knox ranch took them northwest, following the river as Zachary had described. The land here was lusher than around Brielle's homestead, with cottonwoods growing thick along the water and grass that stayed green despite the summer heat. Cattle grazed in the distance, sleek and healthy, and Brielle could see the evidence of careful management everywhere she looked. Fences in good repair, water troughs full, a windmill turning lazily in the breeze to pump water from a deep well. The ranch house itself was larger than she had expected, a sprawling adobe structure with a deep porch and genuine glass windows. Several outbuildings clustered nearby. A barn, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, a chicken coop, a smokehouse. It was prosperous and well-maintained, the home of someone who had put down deep roots and intended to stay. Zachary helped both women dismount and called out toward the house. "Thomas, get out here." A moment later, a man appeared in the doorway. He was clearly Zachary's brother, with the same dark hair and strong features, though his face was leaner and he walked with a pronounced limp, leaning heavily on a carved wooden cane. His eyes were sharp and intelligent as they took in the scene. "Well, this is interesting," Thomas said. "You bringing home strays again, Zach? This is Miss Brielle Vaughn and her sister, Miss Bonnie. They need somewhere safe to stay for a while. Miss Brielle, Miss Bonnie, this is my brother Thomas. He is the brains of this operation." "Only because you are all brawn and no sense," Thomas said, but his tone was affectionate. He studied the two women with open curiosity. "Safe from what, exactly?" "A legal guardian who wants to institutionalize Miss Bonnie because she is mute," Zachary said bluntly. "Their uncle showed up in Clifton today making threats. They need shelter until we can figure out a better solution." Thomas's expression sharpened. "Mute, but not deaf or simple." Bonnie shook her head firmly and held up her slate where she had already written. "I can hear and understand perfectly. I just cannot speak." "Fascinating," Thomas said, his interest clearly piqued. "I would love to talk with you more about that, Miss Bonnie, if you do not mind. I have been studying some medical texts that discuss conditions like yours." For the first time since Silas's appearance, Bonnie smiled. She wrote, "I would like that. No one ever wants to understand, they just want to fix me or send me away. Then they are fools." Thomas turned to his brother. "They can stay in the guest rooms. Miss Bonnie can have the room next to the library, and Miss Brielle can take the corner room with the view of the mountains. I will have Maria prepare the rooms." "Maria?" Brielle asked. "Our housekeeper," Zachary explained. "She has been with the family since Thomas and I were boys. She essentially raised us after our mother passed. You will like her, and she will love having other women in the house. She complains constantly that we are hopeless bachelors." Over the next hour, Brielle and Bonnie were welcomed into the Knox household with an ease that felt almost surreal. Maria turned out to be a comfortable older woman with kind eyes and competent hands who swept them into the house and began fussing over them immediately. She showed them to their rooms, which were indeed spacious and well appointed, and insisted on bringing them water to wash and cool drinks while they settled in. That evening, they ate dinner together in the ranch house dining room. It was the first time Brielle had sat at a proper table with company since before her father died, and it felt both wonderful and strange. Thomas kept the conversation flowing easily, asking about their journey to Arizona, their life before, their impressions of Clifton. He was careful to direct questions to Bonnie that she could answer with nods or by writing, treating her as a full participant in the conversation rather than an afterthought. Zachary was quieter, but Brielle caught him watching her several times with an expression she could not quite read. Concern, certainly, but something else too. Something that made her heart beat a little faster and her cheeks warm. After dinner, Thomas excused himself to work on the ranch books, and Maria shooed them all out of the kitchen so she could clean up. Zachary invited Brielle and Bonnie to sit on the porch and watch the sunset, and they accepted gratefully. The heat of the day was finally breaking, and a cool breeze drifted up from the river. Bonnie sat on the porch steps with her new notebook, writing intently. Brielle sat in one of the chairs, and Zachary settled into the chair beside her. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn gold and pink and purple. "Thank you," Brielle said finally, "for everything. For not turning us away that first day, for bringing supplies, for defending me against my uncle, for bringing us here. You have saved us, and I do not even know why." Zachary was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "You ever meet someone and just know, bone deep, that they are worth fighting for, that they are good and true and deserve better than what life has handed them?" Brielle's breath caught. "I am not sure anyone has ever thought that about me before." "Then you have been around the wrong people." He turned to look at her, and his eyes held an intensity that made her pulse race. "From the moment I saw you standing on your porch, trying so hard to be brave even though you were clearly terrified, I knew. You were someone special, someone worth knowing. And then, when you told me about your sister, about how you gave up everything to protect her, I was certain." "Zachary, Brielle trailed off, not sure what to say. Her feelings were a tangle of gratitude and attraction and fear. She had spent so long focused solely on survival that she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as a woman rather than just a caretaker or a problem. "You do not have to say anything," Zachary said gently. "I know this is complicated. I know you have more pressing concerns than whatever this is between us. But I want you to know that I am here, Brielle, not just offering shelter but offering friendship, support, whatever you need. What if I need more than that?" The words were out before Brielle could stop them, bold and terrifying. "What if I need someone to tell me that it is all right to want something for myself? That it is all right to feel drawn to someone even when my life is falling apart?" Zachary's hand found hers, his fingers warm and calloused from years of ranch work. "Then I would tell you that it is more than all right. I would tell you that you deserve happiness and companionship and every good thing. And I would tell you that I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the day we met." Brielle looked down at their joined hands, marveling at how right it felt. How had this happened? How had this stranger become so important to her so quickly? But maybe that was how it worked sometimes. Maybe sometimes you just knew. "My life is a disaster," she said, needing him to understand the full picture. "My uncle will not give up easily. He is vindictive and stubborn. If you involve yourself with me, with us, you will be drawn into that fight. Then I will fight." Zachary's voice was firm. "I told you, Brielle, you and Bonnie are worth fighting for." From the porch steps, Bonnie turned and looked at them. Even in the fading light, Brielle could see her sister's smile. Bonnie gave an enthusiastic nod, as if to say that Zachary had her full approval, and then turned back to her notebook. Brielle laughed. The sound startled out of her. Some of the tension that had gripped her since encountering Silas finally loosened. Maybe everything would not be all right immediately. Maybe the fight ahead would be hard. But for the first time in a very long time, she did not feel alone. Over the following days, a routine established itself at the Knox ranch. Brielle helped Maria with the household tasks, grateful to have something productive to do with her hands. Bonnie spent hours in the library with Thomas. The two of them bent over books and papers, communicating through her writing and his patient questions. Thomas was teaching her some basic legal concepts, arguing that knowledge was the best defense against people like Silas and Zachary. Zachary was everywhere and nowhere, always busy with ranch duties, but somehow always appearing when Brielle needed something. A strong back to help move furniture. A steady hand when she stumbled on the porch steps. A quiet presence in the evening when her worries threatened to overwhelm her. They talked during those evening hours, long conversations that ranged from the practical to the philosophical. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about his parents who had built this place from nothing, about the struggles and triumphs of running cattle in harsh country. She told him about her childhood, about her father's gentle nature and her mother's strength, about watching Bonnie grow up and learning to understand her sister's silence better than most people understood words. "She is remarkable," Zachary said one evening. They were walking along the river, giving Bonnie and Thomas privacy for one of their intellectual discussions. "Your sister, she is one of the smartest people I have ever met." "I know. Our father always said she saw more than other people because she could not add her own voice to the noise. She learned to watch, to listen, to understand people's hearts rather than just their words." "Is that how she understands us, our hearts?" Brielle glanced at him. "What do you mean?" "She told me yesterday in her writing that she approves of me, that she thinks I make you happy." I was wondering how she knew, since I have been trying very hard not to be too obvious about my feelings. Brielle's heart stuttered. "Your feelings?" Zachary stopped walking and turned to face her fully. The setting sun painted him in shades of gold, highlighting the strong lines of his face. "Brielle, I think you must know by now that my interest in you goes beyond simple neighborliness. I am falling in love with you. Maybe I started falling that very first day when you stepped between me and Bonnie, ready to protect her with nothing but your own brave heart." "Zachary." Brielle's voice was barely a whisper. "I know the timing is terrible. I know you are dealing with your uncle and legal threats and 100 other problems. But I also know that life does not wait for the perfect moment, and I do not want to waste time pretending I do not feel what I feel." "I am afraid," Brielle admitted. "I am afraid of letting myself care for you when everything else in my life is so uncertain. What if my uncle succeeds? What if he takes Bonnie away or finds some way to make legal trouble for me? I could not bear to drag you down with me." "Then we make sure he does not succeed." Zachary took her hands in his. Thomas has been working on a legal strategy. He thinks if we can prove that Bonnie is competent and capable, and that she prefers to remain in your care, we can challenge your uncle's guardianship. It will not be easy or quick, but it is possible. And if it is not enough, then we find another way. But we do it together, Brielle. You do not have to face this alone anymore. Brielle looked up into his steady brown eyes and felt something inside her shift and settle. She had been carrying the weight of responsibility for so long, trying to be strong enough for both herself and Bonnie. The idea of sharing that burden, of accepting help and support, felt both terrifying and liberating. "I am falling in love with you too," she said softly. "I have been fighting it, telling myself it was just gratitude or relief or proximity. But it is more than that. You are more than that." Zachary's smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Then we will face whatever comes together. You and me and Bonnie and Thomas and everyone else who cares about doing what is right. Your uncle does not stand a chance." They walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, and Brielle felt something she had not experienced in years. Genuine hope for the future. The confrontation came 2 weeks later. Silas arrived at the Knox ranch with the sheriff of Clifton, a weathered man named Davies who looked deeply uncomfortable with the whole situation. They rode up to the ranch house in mid-morning, when the heat was just beginning to build and the ranch hands were out working the cattle. Brielle saw them coming from the kitchen window and felt her stomach drop. Bonnie was with her, helping to prepare vegetables for the midday meal, and she gripped her sister's arm in warning. Bonnie looked out the window, saw the riders, and went pale. "Maria, please take Bonnie to the library with Thomas," Brielle said quickly. "I need to face this." "You do not face anything alone," Maria said firmly. "This is Mr. Zachary's house and he will handle it. You stay here with me." But Brielle could not hide. She had been hiding for months and it had solved nothing. She walked to the door and stepped out onto the porch just as Zachary emerged from the barn, his expression hardening when he saw who had arrived. "Sheriff Davies," Zachary said, his tone carefully neutral. "Mr. Vaughn. What brings you out to my ranch?" "I have a warrant for the return of Miss Bonnie Vaughn to her legal guardian," the sheriff said, though he did not sound happy about it. "Her uncle has provided documentation of his guardianship, and he claims she is being held here against her will." "That is a lie," Brielle said, stepping forward. "Bonnie is here of her own choice. She is here because she prefers to be with me rather than locked away in an asylum." Silas fixed her with a cold stare. "Bonnie is not capable of making such choices. She is mentally deficient." "She is not," Zachary said sharply. "She is mute, not simple. There is a significant difference." "Can she speak for herself?" Silas asked mockingly. "Can she tell the sheriff what she wants?" "Actually, yes, she can." Thomas appeared in the doorway, leaning on his cane with Bonnie beside him. She held several sheets of paper covered in her careful handwriting. "Miss Bonnie has prepared a statement explaining her situation and her preferences. She has also demonstrated, to my satisfaction as someone with legal training, that she is fully competent to make her own decisions." He handed the papers to the sheriff, who began to read. Brielle watched his expression shift from uncertainty to surprise to what looked like relief. "This is very clear," Sheriff Davies said. "Miss Bonnie states that she is 20 years old, of sound mind, and wishes to remain in her sister's care. She states that she does not wish to be institutionalized and that she fears for her safety in her uncle's custody." "The law does not care what she wants," Silas snapped. "I have guardianship. Guardianship of an adult can be challenged, especially when the ward demonstrates competence and the guardian demonstrates potential harm," Thomas said calmly. "We have been researching the relevant case law. Arizona Territory has upheld the right of adult wards to petition for release from guardianship when they can prove they are capable of self-management. Miss Bonnie's statement, combined with testimony from myself and others who have observed her over the past weeks, would constitute such proof. "This is ridiculous," Silas sputtered. "She cannot speak. How can she manage herself?" "I am mute, Mr. Vaughn," Bonnie wrote rapidly on her slate and held it up for all to see. "I am not helpless. I can read, write, manage household tasks, and make reasoned decisions. The only thing I cannot do is produce vocal sound. That does not make me incompetent." She handed the slate to the sheriff, who read it and nodded. "She makes a good point." "Whose side are you on?" Silas demanded. "I am on the side of the law, Mr. Vaughn." "And the law is not as clear in your favor as you seem to think." Sheriff Davies handed the papers back to Thomas. "I am not comfortable removing Miss Bonnie from this ranch against her clearly stated wishes, especially when she appears to be well cared for and safe. If you want to pursue your guardianship rights, you will need to do so through the courts. I will not serve as your personal enforcer." "This is outrageous. I will report you to your superiors." "You do that." The sheriff sounded weary. "But I suspect they will tell you the same thing I am telling you now. Miss Bonnie is an adult who has expressed clear preferences about her own care. Unless you can prove she is a danger to herself or others, which you plainly cannot, then her wishes carry weight." Silas turned his fury on Brielle. "This is not over. You have stolen from me, you have defied my authority, and you have corrupted my niece with your selfish independence. I will see you answer for this." "The only one who needs to answer for anything is you," Zachary said, his voice low and dangerous. "You tried to institutionalize a young woman who did not need institutionalization. You tried to separate sisters who clearly love and care for each other. And you did all of it for what? To avoid the minor inconvenience of having a quiet niece. To save yourself the supposed embarrassment of her condition. How I manage my family is none of your concern, Mr. Knox. It became my concern when you threatened people under my protection. And let me make something very clear to you, Silas Vaughn. If you continue to harass Brielle and Bonnie, if you continue to pursue this vendetta, you will find yourself facing more than just legal challenges. I have influence in this territory. I have friends and connections. I can make your business very difficult if I choose to. Are you threatening me? I am promising you. Leave them alone. Go back to wherever you came from and forget about them. They do not want your guardianship or your money or anything else from you. Let them live their lives in peace." Silas looked between Zachary, Thomas, and the sheriff, clearly calculating his options. Finally, his lips twisted into an ugly sneer. "You think you have won, but you are only delaying the inevitable. That girl belongs in an institution, and eventually everyone will see it." He jerked his horse around and rode off in a cloud of dust. The sheriff lingered a moment longer, looking apologetic. "I am sorry about that, Miss Vaughn. Both of you. Your uncle is a persistent man, and I fear he may continue to make trouble." "We will be ready if he does," Thomas said. "Thank you for being reasonable, Sheriff." After the sheriff left, they all stood on the porch in silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then Bonnie threw her arms around Brielle, hugging her tightly, and Brielle hugged back with tears streaming down her face. "You were so brave," Brielle whispered. "You stood up to him." Bonnie pulled back and wrote quickly. "I had all of you beside me. That made me brave." That evening, they had what Maria called a celebration dinner. She roasted a chicken and made fresh biscuits, and even produced a dried apple pie she had been saving for a special occasion. They ate and laughed and talked about the confrontation, reliving the moment when the sheriff had refused to do Silas's bidding. "He will try again," Thomas warned. "Men like that do not give up easily. He may attempt to file legal challenges or dig up some old law that supports his position. Then we will fight him again, Zachary said. He reached across the table and took Brielle's hand. As many times as it takes. We should probably formalize things, Thomas mused. Brielle, you should consider filing for formal custody or guardianship of Bonnie. As an adult sister with demonstrated ability to care for her, you have a strong claim. It would supersede your uncle's authority. Can we do that? Brielle asked. We can certainly try. I will draft the paperwork and we can file it with the territorial court. It may take time, but it would establish a legal foundation for your relationship with Bonnie that your uncle could not easily challenge. Hope and relief flooded through Brielle in equal measure. She had been so focused on simply surviving, on keeping Bonnie safe day by day, that she had not thought about building a real, legally defensible future. But maybe that was possible now. Maybe, with help, they could create a life that no one could take away. After dinner, Zachary asked Brielle to walk with him. They strolled toward the river in the cooling evening air, and Brielle felt more at peace than she had in months. The confrontation with Silas had been frightening, but they had won. Not permanently, perhaps, but for now. And that felt like victory enough. I have been thinking, Zachary said as they reached the riverbank, about the future, about what comes next. What have you been thinking? That I do not want you to leave. Not when we resolve this issue with your uncle, not ever. I want you here, Brielle. You and Bonnie both. I want you to make this ranch your home. Brielle's heart swelled. Zachary, that is incredibly generous, but we cannot impose on your hospitality forever. I am not talking about hospitality. I am talking about something more permanent. He took both her hands and looked into her eyes. Marry me, Brielle, be my wife. Let me be your partner in every sense of the word. Brielle stared at him, stunned. Marry you? But we have only known each other a few weeks. I know, and if you need more time, I will wait. But I also know what I feel, and I know that what we have is real and true. I want to spend my life with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me. I want to help raise Bonnie as if she were my own sister. I want to build a future with you. What about love? Brielle whispered. Marriage should be about love. Then it is a good thing I am deeply, completely, irrevocably in love with you. Zachary smiled. Have been since the day you stood on your porch and lied so badly about those extra boots. Brielle laughed, the sound breaking free from the tightness in her chest. I am in love with you too. I think I started falling when you offered us water for our horses and kindness when you could have just ridden away. Is that a yes? It is a yes. Yes, I will marry you, Zachary Knox. Yes to all of it. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise. The river murmured beside them and the stars began to appear overhead, and Brielle felt like her whole life had been leading to this moment. All the fear and struggle and uncertainty had brought her here, to this man, to this place, to this perfect possibility of happiness. When they walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, they found Bonnie waiting on the porch with Thomas and Maria. Bonnie took one look at their joined hands and radiant expressions and jumped up with a huge smile. She grabbed her slate and wrote in large, emphatic letters, "Finally." Everyone laughed, and Maria pulled them all inside for coffee and more pie, declaring that happy news deserved proper celebration. They stayed up late into the night, making plans and dreaming about the future. Thomas offered to handle all the legal arrangements for both the guardianship petition and the marriage. Maria began listing everything that would need to be done to prepare for a wedding, even a simple one. And Bonnie wrote a long note to Brielle that made her cry. It said, "You gave up everything to protect me and give me a life worth living. Now you have found someone who will protect and cherish you the same way. I am so happy for you. You deserve all the love in the world." The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the ranch house parlor. It was a small affair, with just Thomas and Maria as witnesses, and a traveling preacher who rode through Clifton once a month to tend to the spiritual needs of the scattered population. Brielle wore a simple blue dress that Maria had altered to fit her perfectly, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Bonnie had gathered from along the river. Zachary stood waiting for her with such open joy on his face that Brielle felt tears prick her eyes. Thomas stood beside his brother as best man, and Bonnie stood beside Brielle, holding a handkerchief and already crying happy tears. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. The preacher spoke about love and partnership, about building a life together through faith and commitment. When the time came for vows, Zachary spoke as clearly and firmly, his eyes never leaving Brielle's face. I, Zachary Knox, take you, Brielle Vaughn, to be my wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and protect you all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in joy and in hardship, to support your dreams and share your burdens. I promise to treat your sister as my own family and to build a home where you both will always be safe and welcome. Brielle's voice shook slightly as she gave her own vows, but she meant every word with her whole heart. I, Brielle Vaughn, take you, Zachary Knox, to be my husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in all things, to bring joy to your home and warmth to your heart. I promise to build a life with you worth living, full of love and laughter and hope. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed her with such tenderness that Brielle felt her heart might burst. Behind them, Maria was crying openly, and Thomas was grinning widely, and Bonnie was clapping silently, her face radiant with happiness. They celebrated with a special dinner that Maria had been preparing for days. The table was laden with roasted beef, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and an actual cake that Maria had somehow managed to bake in the wood stove despite the summer heat. They ate and laughed and told stories, and Brielle felt surrounded by family in a way she had not experienced since her father died. As the evening drew to a close, Bonnie gave Brielle and Zachary a gift she had been working on in secret. It was a framed piece of embroidery, clearly sewn with painstaking care, that showed the ranch house with figures standing on the porch. Beneath it, Bonnie had stitched words in careful letters. Home is where love lives. Thank you for giving me both. Brielle hugged her sister tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude and love. Everything they had endured, all the fear and uncertainty and struggle, had led to this, to family, to home, to a future bright with possibility. That night, as Brielle lay beside her husband in the bed they would now share, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the frightened woman who had hidden her sister in a loft, terrified of discovery. She thought about the day Zachary Knox had ridden into her life and said, with simple kindness, "You are both welcome." Those words had changed everything. They had opened a door to a new life, to love, to the possibility of happiness she had almost stopped believing in. And now here she was, married to a good man, with her sister safe and cherished, building a future on a ranch that felt more like home than anywhere she had ever lived. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary murmured in the darkness, his arm warm around her. "About how lucky I am. About how you saved us." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "You brought light and purpose to my life, Brielle. This ranch was just a place before you came. Now it is a home." She turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. That was all that mattered. The legal battle with Silas continued for several months. True to Thomas's predictions, Their uncle filed multiple challenges and attempted to drag them through territorial court. But with Thomas handling their legal defense and Zachary's influence in the territory supporting their case, they had resources Sela's could not match. The turning point came when the territorial judge agreed to interview Bonnie directly. Thomas had prepared her carefully, coaching her on what questions might be asked and how to present her case. When the day came, Brielle and Zachary accompanied her to the courthouse in Tucson, both of them nervous but determined. The judge was an older man with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. He invited Bonnie into his chambers along with Thomas as her legal representative, while Brielle and Zachary waited anxiously outside. The interview lasted over an hour. When they finally emerged, Bonnie's face was tired but triumphant. She wrote quickly on her ever-present slate, "He understood. He really listened to me." Thomas was smiling. The judge was very impressed with Bonnie's clarity of thought and reasoning. He asked her about her daily life, her ability to manage tasks, her understanding of her own situation. She answered everything perfectly through writing. He also read the statements we submitted from Sheriff Davies, from Maria, from several townspeople who have observed Bonnie over the past months. The evidence is overwhelming that she is competent and well cared for. 2 weeks later, the judge's ruling arrived. He had granted Brielle full legal guardianship of Bonnie, superseding Sela's claim. Furthermore, he had included a strongly worded opinion about the rights of individuals with physical disabilities to make their own choices about their lives, stating that muteness alone was not grounds for institutionalization or forced guardianship. When they received the news, the whole household erupted in celebration. Maria cooked another special dinner. Thomas broke out a bottle of whiskey he had been saving, and even the ranch hands were invited to join the festivities. It was official now. Bonnie was legally under Brielle's care, and Sela's could not touch her. A month later, they received a letter from Sela's. It was brief and bitter, informing them that he was washing his hands of the whole affair and wanted nothing more to do with either of his nieces. He considered them both ungrateful and foolish, and he hoped they enjoyed the hard life they had chosen for themselves. Brielle read the letter aloud to Zachary and then tossed it into the fireplace. "Good riddance," she said firmly. "Amen to that," Zachary agreed. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm on the ranch. Brielle took over managing the household alongside Maria, discovering that she had a talent for organization and efficiency. Bonnie continued her studies with Thomas, who had started teaching her bookkeeping and basic accounting. It turned out she had a head for numbers, and within months, she was helping Thomas manage the ranch finances. Zachary continued running the cattle operation, but he made sure to spend time with his wife every day. They had established a routine of evening walks along the river, time set aside just for the two of them to talk and be together. During these walks, they shared their days, their hopes, their dreams for the future. "I want children," Zachary said one evening as they sat on the riverbank watching the sunset. "I want to fill that house with the sound of little voices. I want to give our children the kind of childhood Thomas and I had, full of love and adventure." "I want that too," Brielle said softly. "I want to build a family with you, a real family where everyone is valued and loved for who they are." "Bonnie will be the best aunt any child could hope for," Zachary observed. "She is patient and kind and creative. She will teach them all sorts of things. She will teach them that being different is not the same as being less," Brielle agreed. "That everyone has value regardless of how they communicate or what challenges they face." 4 months after the wedding, Brielle discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mix of joy and fear. She had always wanted children, but the idea of actually bringing a new life into the world felt enormous and terrifying. Bonnie was the first person she told after Zachary. Her sister's reaction was pure, unrestrained delight. She hugged Brielle fiercely, and then wrote an entire page about all the things she would do as an aunt, from sewing baby clothes to teaching the child to read to taking them on walks to discover interesting rocks and plants. Maria cried happy tears and immediately began planning for the baby's arrival. Thomas congratulated Zachary with a handshake and a knowing smile, and Zachary himself was radiant with joy, treating Brielle like she was made of spun glass, even though she insisted she felt perfectly fine. The pregnancy progressed normally, though the Arizona summer heat made the later months challenging. Brielle spent more time indoors, working on sewing projects with Maria and Bonnie. Together, they created a beautiful layette of tiny clothes and blankets, each stitch infused with love and hope. In late March of 1884, after a long labor that tested Brielle's strength and courage, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James Zachary Knox, after Zachary's father and himself. He had a good set of lungs and a head of dark hair, and Zachary cried when he first held his son. Bonnie was entranced by her nephew. She would sit for hours just watching him sleep, and as he grew older, she became his favorite person besides his parents. She could make him laugh with funny faces, could soothe him when he was fussy, could entertain him with silent games that required only gestures and expressions. "She is going to spoil him rotten," Zachary observed one day, watching Bonnie rock the baby while singing him a silent lullaby, her lips moving without sound but her expression so full of love that words were unnecessary. "Let her," Brielle said contentedly. "She deserves to love and be loved." She spent too many years being told she was a burden. Now she gets to be cherished. James was 6 months old when they received unexpected visitors. Brielle was in the kitchen helping Maria prepare lunch when she heard horses approaching. She looked out the window and saw 3 riders, but these were not threatening. They looked travel-worn and hesitant, and something about the woman in the lead struck a chord of memory. When they came closer, Brielle gasped, "Aunt Margaret." The woman dismounted and pulled off her riding gloves, revealing a kind, weathered face that Brielle remembered from childhood. Margaret had been her mother's younger sister, living far to the east. They had lost touch after Brielle's mother died. "Brielle," Margaret's voice was tentative. "Is it really you?" They met in the yard, and Margaret pulled Brielle into a tight embrace. "My dear girl, I have been searching for you for months. I only recently learned about your father's death and Silas's guardianship. I came as soon as I could. How did you find us?" "I went to Clifton first and made inquiries. Eventually, someone directed me to the Knox Ranch, saying that was where the Vaughn sisters lived. I hardly dared hope it was true." Brielle led her aunt into the house, calling for Bonnie and Zachary. The reunion was emotional, with Bonnie crying tears of joy at seeing an aunt who had always treated her with kindness and respect. Margaret explained that she had been traveling abroad when the sister's father died, and had only recently returned to discover what had happened. "I would have taken you both in immediately," Margaret said, distress clear in her voice. "If I had known what Silas was planning, I would never have allowed it. You are my sister's daughters. You are family." "We found family here," Brielle said, gesturing to encompass Zachary, Thomas, Maria, and the ranch around them. "We found home." Margaret stayed for a week, getting to know Zachary and Thomas and meeting her great-nephew James. She was delighted by Bonnie's intelligence and independence, and she was clearly relieved to see both sisters happy and settled. Before she left, Margaret made them promise to write regularly and to visit if they ever traveled east. She also made a point of speaking to Zachary privately, and when they emerged from the conversation, Zachary was smiling. "What did she say?" Brielle asked later. "She thanked me for taking care of you and Bonnie. She said your mother would have been grateful that you found someone who saw your worth and your sister's worth. And then she tried to give me money, as if I would accept payment for loving you." Brielle laughed. "That sounds like Aunt Margaret. She always tried to fix things with practical solutions. I told her the only payment I needed was the joy of being your husband and Bonnie's brother. She seemed satisfied with that. 3 years passed in peaceful contentment. James grew into a bright, active toddler who adored his Aunt Bonnie and followed her everywhere. She taught him a unique form of communication, mixing signs she had developed with written words, so that even before he could speak clearly, he could understand and respond to her. Brielle gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Margaret, after Margaret and the wild roses that grew along the river. And then, 2 years after that, to another son they named William Thomas, honoring Thomas's dedication to their family. The ranch prospered under Zachary's management and Thomas's business acumen. They expanded the herd and bought additional land, building the Knox Ranch into one of the most successful operations in the territory. But success never changed Zachary's essential nature. He remained kind, generous, and devoted to his family above all else. Bonnie never married, but she lived a full and purposeful life. She became known throughout the region as the woman who ran the Knox Ranch books with impeccable accuracy. And several business owners in Clifton sought her services as well. She taught all the Knox children to read and do mathematics, and she filled notebooks with her observations about the natural world, detailed accounts that Thomas insisted would be valuable to future scientists. On summer evenings, the family would gather on the porch after supper. Zachary would hold whichever baby was youngest, while the older children played in the yard. Bonnie would sit with her notebooks, writing or sketching. Thomas would read aloud from whatever book had captured his interest. Maria would shell peas or mend clothes, her presence a constant comfort. And Brielle would sit beside her husband, watching their children play and feeling grateful for every moment. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked her one such evening, when the children were all finally in bed and they had a rare moment alone. "Leaving your old life behind, coming out here, all the struggle and fear." Brielle thought about the frightened young woman who had hidden her sister in a loft, terrified of discovery and desperate to protect the one person she loved most. She thought about the day Zachary Knox rode into her life and changed everything with simple, steady kindness. She thought about the family they had built, the love they had nurtured, the home they had created. "I do not regret a single moment," she said firmly. "Every hardship led me here to this life. I would endure it all again in a heartbeat. Even the part where I found you both hiding and said you were both welcome, especially that part." Brielle kissed him softly. "Those words saved us, Zachary. They gave us hope when we had none. They opened the door to everything good that followed." "Then I will keep saying them," Zachary promised. "Every day for the rest of our lives. You are welcome here, Brielle. You and Bonnie and our children and anyone else who needs the shelter of our home and our love. Always welcome. Always cherished, always home," and they were. Through all the years that followed, through challenges and triumphs, through the ordinary moments that make up a life, they remained exactly that. Welcome, cherished, home. The children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, of how their father had offered sanctuary to 2 frightened women, and how love had bloomed from kindness. They grew up understanding that family was not just about blood, but about choosing to love and protect each other. They grew up watching their Aunt Bonnie prove every day that silence did not mean absence of thought or feeling, that different did not mean less. James eventually took over running the ranch, working alongside his father and uncle to build on the legacy they had created. Rose married a teacher from Clifton and opened a school where children of all abilities were welcome and valued. William studied law like his uncle and spent his career fighting for the rights of people with disabilities, inspired by the aunt who had taught him that everyone deserved dignity and respect. And through it all, Brielle and Zachary remained partners in every sense of the word. They had disagreements and challenges like any couple, but they faced them together, united by the love that had brought them together and the commitment they had made to each other. When they were both old and gray, sitting on that same porch where they had shared so many evenings, Zachary would still reach for Brielle's hand, and she would still feel the same flutter in her heart that she had felt as a young woman when he first looked at her with kindness in his eyes. "Do you remember," Zachary would say, "when I first found you and Bonnie, when I said you were both welcome?" "I remember everything," Brielle would reply. "I remember being so frightened and alone, and I remember you choosing to see us as people worth helping rather than problems to be solved. Best decision I ever made. Best day of my life." And it was true. That day when Zachary Knox had ridden onto her property and discovered her secret, when he had looked at two frightened women and offered them sanctuary and respect, had been the beginning of everything good that followed. It had been the first page of a love story that would span decades, the foundation of a family built on acceptance and kindness, the seed of a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. In the end, that was all any of them could ask for: to be seen, to be valued, to be welcome, to be loved. And they were. Oh, they were. Years later, when Brielle and Zachary were in their 70s and surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren, Bonnie was still living on the ranch. She had never needed to speak to communicate her love, her wisdom, her gentle guidance. The younger generations adored their great-aunt Bonnie, seeking her out for advice communicated through her careful writing, for the special attention she gave each one, for the safe harbor of her silent but profound affection. On Brielle's 75th birthday, the whole family gathered for a celebration. The ranch house, expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, was full of laughter and life. Tables were set up outside under the cottonwood trees, laden with food prepared by dozens of loving hands. Children ran and played while adults caught up with far-flung relatives who had traveled to be present. Zachary stood and raised his glass, calling for attention. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined by decades of Arizona sun, but his eyes still sparkled with the same warmth and strength that had captured Brielle's heart so many years ago. "I want to say something," he announced, waiting for the crowd to quiet. 52 years ago, I met a woman who changed my life. She was hiding herself and her sister, trying to build a safe place in a world that had been unkind to them. When I found them, I said something that I did not know would become the foundation of everything good in my life. I said, "You are both welcome." He looked at Brielle and she felt tears gathering in her eyes. After all these years, he could still make her heart swell with love. "Those words," Zachary continued, "became the principle by which we built this family. Everyone is welcome here. Everyone is valued. Everyone is loved for exactly who they are. We have built a legacy not of wealth or land, though we have been blessed with both, but of acceptance and kindness. And I owe it all to the woman brave enough to run when she needed to, strong enough to fight for those she loved, and generous enough to let me into her heart." He raised his glass higher. "To Brielle, my wife, my partner, my love. And to Bonnie, sister of my heart, who taught us all that there are many ways to speak and the truest language is love. And to all of you, our family, proof that kindness multiplies and love endures. May you always remember that in this family, everyone is welcome." The toast was echoed by dozens of voices, and Brielle found herself surrounded by embraces, by children and grandchildren expressing their love. Bonnie appeared at her side, moving slowly now with the ache of age in her joints, and pressed a letter into Brielle's hands. "Read it later," Bonnie's note said, "when you have a quiet moment." That night, after the celebration had wound down and most of the family had departed or settled into guest rooms, Brielle sat on the porch with the letter. Zachary dozed in his chair beside her, tired but content. She opened the envelope and began to read Bonnie's careful script. "My dearest sister, on this day when we celebrate your 75 years, I wanted to tell you something I have never been able to adequately express, even with all the words I have written over the decades. You saved my life. Not just when you fled with me to escape Uncle Sela's, though that too, but every day since, you have chosen to see me as whole and complete rather than broken or lacking. You fought for my right to live a life of dignity and purpose. You gave me a home where I was not just tolerated but celebrated. And then you brought Zachary into our lives, and he reinforced everything you had taught me. That I had value, that I had worth, that my silence was not an absence but simply a different kind of presence. Together, you two built a family where every person was welcomed regardless of their differences or challenges. You taught your children and grandchildren that love is not about conforming to expectations, but about accepting each other as we are. I have lived a beautiful life, Brielle. I have known love and purpose and belonging. I have contributed to this family and this ranch in meaningful ways. I have been allowed to be fully myself without apology or shame, and I owe all of it to you and your courageous heart. Thank you for being my sister, my protector, my friend. Thank you for loving me enough to risk everything. Thank you for giving me a life worth living with all my love, now and always. Bonnie." Brielle was crying openly by the time she finished reading. She looked over at her sleeping husband, at the ranch spread out around them, at the stars bright overhead in the clear Arizona sky. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the choices she had made and the grace she had been given. If she could go back and tell that frightened young woman hiding her sister in a loft that everything would work out, that she would find love and family and a home beyond her wildest dreams, she wondered if that younger self would have believed it. Probably not. The burdens had seemed too heavy, the obstacles too great. But somehow, through courage and kindness and the grace of good people who chose to help rather than judge, it had all worked out. Better than worked out. It had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of acceptance and the enduring strength of family built on mutual respect and affection. Zachary stirred and opened his eyes. "What are you reading?" "A letter from Bonnie. A beautiful letter. She is a beautiful soul." Zachary reached for Brielle's hand. "Come to bed, love. We are too old to be staying up this late." "We are too old for a lot of things," Brielle agreed, but she rose and helped him to his feet. Together they walked into the house they had shared for over half a century, moving slowly but moving together, the way they had faced everything life brought them. That night, as she lay beside her husband listening to his steady breathing, Brielle thought about legacy. What would they leave behind when they were gone? Not just property and possessions, but something more important. They would leave behind a family that knew how to love unconditionally. Children and grandchildren who had learned to see past surface differences to the heart beneath. A ranch that had become a haven for anyone who needed sanctuary. A story of kindness triumphing over cruelty, of love overcoming fear. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Bonnie passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83, surrounded by the family she had loved and who had loved her in return. At her funeral, person after person stood to speak about what she had meant to them, her patience in teaching them to read, her skill with numbers that had kept the ranch profitable, her gentle wisdom that had guided them through difficult decisions, her quiet presence that had been a comfort in times of sorrow. James, now 55 years old and running the ranch with his own grown children, spoke about his aunt with tears in his eyes. Aunt Bonnie taught me that words are not the only way to communicate truth. She taught me to watch and listen, to pay attention to what people show you through their actions rather than what they tell you with their voices. She taught me that silence can be powerful and meaningful. She taught me that every person has value, regardless of how they move through the world. She was my aunt, my teacher, my friend, and this world is poorer without her. Brielle, now 80 years old and frail herself, held Zachary's hand throughout the service. Losing Bonnie felt like losing part of her own heart. They had been through so much together, had built this beautiful life together. But even through her grief, Brielle felt grateful. Grateful that Bonnie had lived to be 83, that she had known love and purpose, that she had been valued and cherished right up until her peaceful end. "She had a good life," Zachary murmured as they stood at the graveside, "because of you, because you refused to let anyone diminish her or lock her away. You gave her the gift of a life lived on her own terms." "We gave her that gift," Brielle corrected. "You as much as me. You welcomed her into your home and your heart. You treated her as family from the first day." "How could I not? She was your sister, and she was extraordinary in her own right." They buried Bonnie on a hillside overlooking the river with a headstone that read, "Bonnie Vaughn, 1863–1946. Beloved sister, aunt, and friend." Her silence spoke volumes. Her presence blessed us all. Brielle herself passed away 2 years later at the age of 82, with Zachary holding her hand and their children and grandchildren gathered around. Her last words were for her husband. "Thank you for saying we were welcome. Thank you for meaning it. Thank you for everything." Zachary survived her by only 6 months. The family said he died of a broken heart, but really he died of a full one. A heart so full of love and memory and gratitude that it simply could not contain any more. He was buried beside Brielle, their graves flanked by Bonnie's, 3 people who had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful from their unlikely connection. The Knox Ranch continued through the generations, always operated by Zachary and Brielle's descendants, always maintaining the principle that had founded it. Everyone is welcome. Over the years, it became known as a place where people who did not fit elsewhere could find acceptance, where children with differences were embraced rather than hidden, where the value of a person was measured by their character rather than their abilities or conformity to expectations. And if you visited the ranch today, you would find Bonnie's notebooks preserved in the ranch office, her careful observations about nature and weather, and the behavior of cattle still consulted by modern ranchers. You would find a scholarship fund in her name that helped children with communication differences attend college. You would find her story told and retold as an inspiration, proof that a person's worth is not determined by their voice, but by their heart and mind and soul. You would find, most importantly, a family still living by the words Zachary Knox spoke so many years ago. "You are both welcome." Those words, offered in kindness to 2 frightened women, had echoed through the decades, shaping lives and hearts, creating ripples of acceptance and love that spread far beyond their original utterance. They had become more than a simple invitation. They had become a philosophy, a legacy, a promise passed from generation to generation. And in that way, Brielle and Zachary and Bonnie lived on, not just in memory but in principle, not just in the past but in the present and future. In every act of kindness their descendants performed, in every person welcomed who had been rejected elsewhere, in every voice that spoke up for those who could not speak for themselves. The love story that began in 1883 in the hot Arizona desert, when a cowboy found two sisters and offered them sanctuary, never really ended. It simply transformed and multiplied, becoming a legacy of love that would endure as long as people remembered the power of seeing each other truly, of offering welcome without conditions, of choosing kindness over judgment. And that, in the end, was the greatest love story of all. Not just the romance between Brielle and Zachary, though that was real and deep and enduring, but the larger love story of a family built on acceptance, of a legacy founded on welcome, of a principle that everyone, regardless of how they speak or move or think, deserves dignity, respect, and belonging. Some love stories are told in words, some in actions, some in the lives they touch and the generations they shape. The love story of Brielle, Zachary, and Bonnie was all of these things. And it lived on, a testament to courage and kindness and the transformative power of saying and meaning you are welcome here. Always welcome, always valued, always loved, and that promise, like true love itself, endured forever.